So this takes us over to our last resident experts at the table, Dr. Michael Lelah. Dr. Lelah is the Chief Research Scientist at Mercola Health Resources, and previously was the Technical Director at Now Foods. He's worked in food, packaging, biotech, pharma, and the chemical industries, involved with research and development, new product development, scientific and clinical studies, regulatory affairs, and quality. I would conclude by saying to say he is passionate about natural health and nutrition is truly an understatement, and reflects really the quality of and the integrity of the talent that we are soliciting to bring into this process. So, Michael, if we are to adhere to our 4 guidelines that we have talked about to begin with, how broadly or narrow must we look at our challenges ahead of us in terms of being able to create a process and define what it is that we're trying to define?
Wow, so it's really a fascinating and complex question about, and challenge about how to define and how to set the standard for natural. You could look at it as a spectrum. On the one side of the spectrum is a very narrow, very rigid definition of natural, whereby perhaps a large percentage of products, processed foods, or dietary supplements, or personal care items in the natural health food store, be that store a brick and mortar store or an online store, doesn't matter, but that's where the natural consumer shops. That would eliminate some large percentage of those products from meeting the standard. So that's one end of the spectrum. Then on the other end of the spectrum, where you have a more relaxed or broader definition of natural, which will allow for a larger percentage of products in the natural health food store where the natural consumer shops and wants those products, would fall under the umbrella of natural. And perhaps within that context, there can be different degrees of natural, perhaps different levels, if you will, say a gold, silver, or bronze standard for natural, but they all would be natural. So that's a very, that's a very broad spectrum with very, very complex questions that are very, very specific, related to, the feed that goes into the animal, that goes into the product, and those are the questions that I think it's the same. I'm going to echo the same theme that you've heard here, and that's, we have to get all the stakeholders together and have that joint conversation about where do we want to be in that definition and standard.
So given that, do you see any remote possibility that the standards in one area would be similar at all to standards in another? Dietary supplements versus food.
So on a philosophical level, you could say, well, wait a minute, the standard for natural should be the same whether it's food or any other product. But from perhaps a more practical sense, foods and animal foods are taken in large quantities, hundreds of grams. Dietary supplements are taken in small quantities, ones of grams to fives of grams. And then you have topical products for personal care that are put on the skin. And then you have household products that there is only limited contact with those products. And so given those different categories, we could see different standards being set for each of those categories, where the standards would be higher for those where the consumer is exposed to more contact, and lower for those where the consumer is exposed to less contact. So we could see that as one possible outcome of this process.
Very interesting. So we're going to start with food. That's been our commitment, although I believe that there'll be duplicative work done on other areas at the same time. If we start with food, what do you see as the sort of decision tree? Is it inclusive? Is it exclusive? Is it about, what are the measures that we need to sort of dial into this process to make sure we don't miss anything along that complex tree?
So there are a number of different areas that this seal or certification will have to probe into. The product ingredients, and to follow the ingredient trail from the farm to the product itself. That's going to be one aspect of defining natural. Another aspect of defining natural will be the process or processing of the ingredients and product as it gets to its final form, all the way from what are considered traditional natural processes such as fermentation. On the one hand, again, the spectrum to extreme chemical synthesis such as hydrogen cracking on the other hand, which would probably not fall into the natural realm. And so where does that happen? And then the third area would be sustainability, where we'd be looking at agricultural practices, energy practices, and then human practices as well, as all part of the whole concept of sustainability. And I think in all of these areas, we have to keep in mind doing no harm or minimizing harm. And that's really perhaps where one area where consumers are interested. They don't want harm to themselves, they don't want harm to the environment, they don't want harm to the people that have to make the products. And so those would be the areas that we would be focusing on in establishing these standards.
So let me follow up with this. There are lots of fortified foods. Vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, and more on the shelves all the time. And I think we're all aware in this room and in the audience that most vitamins that we consume are synthetic. So what do you, I mean, I think we've talked about the transparency of the issues, but is it sustainable to think that we would require vitamins be naturally sourced and not synthetic? Or is there something else that we need to look at in that paradigm that we haven't talked about at the table?
So, as the highest of standards, a synthetic vitamin, such as vitamin C that comes directly from amla or from other fruits, and just a pure extraction, is at the highest level of natural. But the potency, the amount of vitamin C that is available is very low. And so we need to begin to expand our definition of natural. And it is true that most vitamins today are synthetically manufactured. But there's something to consider, and that is those synthetic vitamins are the exact same chemical form as in the natural product, the natural form of vitamin C. Perhaps there's some expandability there in terms of, and again, it's what consumers want, expandability in terms of the definition of how we define those particular vitamins. Now, there are also other synthetic ingredients that are not the same chemically, and there are very fine degrees of isomerism, as it's called in the chemical world, where the ingredient may have the same chemical formula but slightly different structure, and now suddenly you're really going outside of the area of natural. So again, I think there is some expandability there when we keep within the concept of nature identical in being able to achieve a definition that would be acceptable to a wide variety of stakeholders.
So I think this is real evidence of that. I mean, I'm constantly being asked, what will the definition of natural be? I think this conversation is really evidence of how complicated and thoughtful the decisions need to be, and how none of these decisions have been predetermined. So I want to take us back on that to the first question that I talked to Todd about, which is back to the research, Michael, which is, we talk about the bioavailability of certain nutrients, and we talk about the science as to whether these things, these synthetic vitamins actually respond the same way as natural vitamins respond. Well, how important is this role that we've developed with Grassroots Health in terms of being able to do nutrient-based research in a population environment versus a clinical trial, which is so classic and maybe not as fitting for our industry as we have talked about earlier? Will that play a significant role in how this conversation moves forward in the future?
Absolutely. I think that the certification process is the first step, and I think the long-term and the long-term challenge for all of us and the long-term opportunity is to be able to link that definition of natural to the promise of natural, which means the research that is directly applicable. And the challenge on the research side is nutrient-based research is much more difficult than the pharmaceutical model for pharmaceutical-based research, because in pharmaceutical-based research, you're introducing a foreign entity into the body, and then you can monitor how it behaves and how it performs, and those protocols are well defined. On the nutrition side, not only are you testing something that you're already getting in food as well, so you can't tell your participants in a clinical study, don't eat, only take this particular nutrient. That's an impossibility. And then in addition to that, you have the complicating factor that many nutrients work together synergistically. And so they are, it is much more complex than that. And it's really getting to that kind of research that is the ultimate goal, and where we're going to achieve the true promise of natural.
So that actually is a beautiful conclusion to what I think is a very good introduction to the level of detail, the complexity, the quality of the people who are engaged in this conversation, and the association's commitment to really bringing in the expertise that we need to tackle these very difficult conversations. I think all of us at the table would agree that we're doing this work out of a labor of love, and that we all have a vision of healthcare for the future that we believe our work will support. And we will all have differences of opinion as we move forward. Our website is now live. It's www.organicandnatural.org. Please, we encourage you to visit it often. We will begin a series of conversations over time. I think our next one is, we're working on scheduling in November, and is likely to be a conversation about sustainability. So we hope that you'll join us online for that conversation and take the opportunity to comment and ask questions on the webinar that we're planning. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your attention.